Chapter 24. Two Sisters. Third hour, first day, second month, year 807. Post-Heavenfall. 4 months ago. The pale light of Haven's moon refracted through a narrow window of frosted glass and iron bars, casting a ghostly glow on the stone floor of Coley's jail cell. Tonight, the air was uncomfortably humid and exacerbated the stench of urine from inmates missing the toilet. There were a few detained in other cells, each separated by a wall and gated off by bars. However, as the only juvenile incarcerated, Coley was allocated her own confinement and sat alone in the corner on top of a cot. Meanwhile, J.C. Ducal presided over the cell block from a wide desk near the entrance to the dungeons. Warden Alfina, assigned to be her partner tonight, rested her head on the same tabletop and was blissfully unaware that her weariness had been a result of J.C.'s spell. The song she had been humming was not just an innocent tune, but imbued with arc designed to gradually dull the senses. The process was slower than unleashing the full extent of the lullaby, but she had all night. There was a mistake to be corrected, and there could be no witnesses to threaten her work. J.C. looked down at Alfina and how smooth and soft her exposed skin appeared from cheek to neck. She was so delicate and vulnerable, sleeping unaware next to a being who could have separated Alfina's skull from her spinal column with a twist of the wrist. Nevertheless, J.C. restrained herself for the sake of maintaining discretion. The fact she recently had her nails manicured was another deterrent towards avoiding a mess. "I'm going outside for a smoke," she mundanely announced, to test if Alfina had fallen asleep. Her partner grunted as barely a reply. Content that the other warden was unconscious, J.C. rose from the table and retrieved the smoking pipe kit from her uniform with practiced familiarity. As she moved through the main workspace of the watchhouse, the few other wardens on duty barely registered her presence, while Lieutenant Peril walked by and gave her a glancing nod. Upon opening the front door and crossing the threshold, J.C. purposely left the entryway ajar for a moment longer than usual. As she gazed at the empty, moonlit street, she felt a presence in the air that was no more than a faint breeze passing into the watchhouse. As the door softly closed behind her, J.C. knew her sister was now inside. The warden took her time filling the chamber of her pipe with tobacco leaves before packing it to her preference and snapping her fingers. A small flame bloomed at the tip of her thumb, to which she used to light the finished product. As J.C. inhaled the sweet and smoky aroma, she could hear the faint song her sister sang coursing through the air and walls to subdue the rest of the watchhouse's inhabitants. By the time the last of the leaves had burned out, the door opened once again, and a middle-aged woman walked out with a stern face of poise and dignity. "Done," Elston spoke flatly and annoyed. J.C. tapped the leftover ashes from her pipe. "I'll say it again because I never get tired of it. Your apprentice was reckless. And I'll say it again that she had power and potential. Her methods would have caused the cattle to fear our coven once we inducted her. Power, potential, but no patience. She was arrogant, with hardly a functional brain cell for wisdom, which is probably why you were so fond of her." Elston let out an inhuman hiss that did little to faze her sibling. "Don't insult my intuition. I've been a part of the Trinity decades before you, and you dare speak to me of arrogance." "You only got to choose because of the tradition of being the eldest," J.C. countered. "It's my turn now." "Fine, but don't let it be a distraction from our work. We're nearly there." J.C. returned the pipe to her leather pouch. "Worry not. I'll only be looking casually. This latest batch here has been infected and will be ready for harvest in the coming months. Your methods of cultivation are far too slow. Yet it produces a far better yield and quality of product compared to yours and our late sisters. If only I had more time to work on your apprentice, hers would have been a very bountiful crop." Worry about your own harvest, and I'll worry about mine, Elston snarled. Are you really sure you want to infect that academy? You would be putting yourself in a lion's den. Actually, more like a lion's jaw. What is a dragon to a lion? This is for Coley. JC let out a short cackle. You kill her yourself, yet swear vengeance for her. How poetic. Her death was not what I wanted, but a necessity of circumstances and the injustice of our times. The warden let out a scoff. You may be the eldest now, but you're still the most insane among us, as are your plans. As she reached for the door handle to return to her post, Elston blurted out a question. Have you eaten tonight? She paused at the unexpected question. I haven't, no. You're looking too skinny. I can see it beneath this form you've chosen. Come, I know of an elven restaurant open late nearby. JC shrugged and acquiesced, knowing the watchhouse would not awaken for several hours. Present day. 22nd hour, 7th day, 5th month, 807 post-Heavenfall. At this late hour, the Church of Turan appeared devoid of inhabitants, with its lights snuffed out and the ingresses locked up. Nevertheless, its dormant and secured state did little to deter JC from boldly breaking in through the front double doors. As soon as they disappeared out of sight, Ariya hurried across the street and moved past the courtyard toward the entrance. Her breathing was heavy and quickened from exertion and shaken nerves as she considered firing the flare now that JC's location had been established. Ariya's hand caressed the tube attached to her belt, but instead reached for her lock-picking pouch instead. She wondered if there was any chance the warden had innocently come to pray, and she justified her conscience as wanting to be completely sure JC was the Night Mother. Yet deep down, Ariya also possessed the morbid curiosity of wanting to see a dream hag's true form. Upon reaching the front doors, she gently pressed her ear against the wooden surface and quietly waited. A minute of silence passed, and she was mostly certain no one was near the threshold. With deep, calming lungfuls of air, Ariya grabbed one of the door handles and delicately turned. Although the lever rotated, the doors themselves refused to move as she felt something resist her attempt to enter. She unfolded her lock-picking set and began to use her burglary skills to find the correct skeleton key. With a soft and satisfying click, the bolt receded into its housing and Ariya was finally able to enter. The door cracked open with the low groan of age, and she peeked inside. To the elf's disappointment, the lack of windows had made the room pitch black, save for the bit of stone flooring that was near the door she could see. Even with her people's evolved sight, they were powerless in absolute darkness, and she momentarily became envious of Kellen's ability to see further than she could. Luckily, Ariya had come prepared. She rifled through her satchel and retrieved an amber bottle of black liquid recently purchased from a local alchemist. She downed the contents, wincing at the harsh, metallic bitterness. As the elixir hit the bottom of her stomach, she felt a rushing chill course upwards from her spine, all the way up to the back of her neck, and then to her eyes. The world went dark for a brief second before being illuminated, as if it were as bright as an overcast day. Ariya cleared her throat of the disgusting aftertaste and looked through the cracked door again. Aside from the side effect of now being colourblind, she was pleased to finally see the entirety of the building's interior. With no pews, cushions, or much decor for comfort, the nave of Turan's church seemed more like a military assembly hall than a place of worship. Yet, reverence to them was evident by the statue of the founder at the head of the chamber, and the many candles and censers placed at their feet. The walls were lined with racks of varying weapons and armour, left throughout the week to be anointed, while the rafters above hung a dozen banners from fellowships of knights and paladins affiliated to this church. JC was nowhere in sight, but Ariya noted several entryways along the sides of the main hall. She stepped inside and began moving along the left wall while sticking close to the support columns along the way. The first door she encountered indicated that it belonged to the women's restroom. Ariya doubted the warden was there, yet her training taught that it was better to check than to be sorry. She cautiously pushed the door open and found the expected fixtures of stalls and sinks, and no one immediately present. After checking each toilet and finding them unoccupied, she returned to the nave and proceeded carefully toward the next room labelled Quartermasters, Smithy, and Armoury. Immediately before her was a small waiting room where one of the walls had a service window with bars and a heavy iron door near it. She peeped through the window and saw a large armoury and smithing area with forges cold and tools waiting to be used by the labourers in the coming morning. The elf watched the area closely for anyone behind the equipment. With some worry, she might see a shadow dart between the machines. Fortunately, the room stayed undisturbed, to the point even the dust and soot remained still. Ariya assumed this room was clear and moved on to the next. After passing by the statue of Turan at the end of the chamber, she stood at an open passageway to a spiral stone stairwell that both ascended and descended. A sign noted that the upper floor contained the library, cleric's private quarters, and the kitchen, while below went to the reliquary, crypts, and arcanics room. Despite 3 other entryways to check on this floor, Ariya's intuition suggested the dream hag was targeting the clergy residing above. With utmost care to be as silent as possible, she crept up the weathered stairs and promised to return back down if she saw the residents were safe. The first few steps progressed normally, but became more disorienting without windows or distinguishing features to use as reference points. The many steps to climb and lack of railing further added to its dizzying nature, causing Ariya to become a tad nauseated by the time she nearly ascended to the end. She swayed and steadied herself with a hand to the wall, yet recovered when her nose abruptly picked up on a scent that seemed out of place. Whereas the church had a fragrant afterburn of candles and incense mixed with the subtle aroma of damp stone, this new odour was smoky, acrid, and stronger in strength akin to a recently lit cigar. Following the scent, Ariya found herself at the mouth of a narrow hallway that bent sharply to the right. The walls were a gallery of stern-faced men and women in armour, with painted eyes seeming to track her every move down the corridor. At the edge of the corner, she paused to catalogue the new corridor and saw 2 open archways on the left and 2 closed doors opposite on the right. Her heart drummed. Knowing the risk of entering such a narrow passage with multiple flanking entrances by herself, each was a possible source of danger, and conventionally should be approached as a team to keep watch of every possible angle. Those allies were, unfortunately, not a luxury she could afford at the moment. With calming breaths, Ariya broke cover and pressed up against the wall to the right. As she crept closer, her eyes remained locked on the first archway across, while her peripheral senses made sure the nearest door along her side remained shut. Her gradual advance revealed the first room to be a library, with shelves and study area complete with a desk and arcane mailbox. Following what Sentinel Dodak had taught, Ariya continued to be highly vigilant of the open chamber as she inched forward and unveiled more details. Yet she suddenly realised the smoky aroma was stronger from the nearest door, and halted when she saw it was actually cracked ajar by a few inches. The elf leaned as much as she could and surveyed the room one visual slice at a time. What she observed was a Spartan bedroom matching the church's aesthetic, with a simple nightstand, a wooden headboard, and a thin mattress. On top of its pillow was a man whose eyes were closed and brow furrowed and sweaty as if in distress. Then came a grey, withered hand, and Ariya instantly froze at the sight. Its fingers were slender and great in length, resembling the appendages of a long-legged spider. "Shh, shh. Come out, don't be shy. Everything will be fine," a gravely voice spoke in an almost song-like fashion. Ariya recoiled with a gasp trapped in her throat and brought her own hands up to muffle it from escaping. Every fibre in her body shivered with a shockwave of raw fear, and she knew she should run. An impulse from Ariya's mind nearly triggered the nerves in her legs to sprint out of the church, but then the voice continued to talk. "Good, good. You're also all ripe and ready." A wave of relief washed over Ariya as she realised the entity was not speaking to her. While her instincts screamed at her to flee and light the flare, the curiosity to know what the creature was doing kept her feet firmly rooted. She watched a spindly hand grasp the man's forehead, while the other brought up a pair of forceps. The massive form of a shadow leaned in, and Ariya could no longer see what they were doing, but could hear the bed shaking under its occupant's spasms. "There we go," the shadow said with some physical struggle, as a faint reddish light began to paint the room in ambient crimson. Its source radiated from between the forceps, where a writhing worm glowed the same hue. The intruder stepped out of view to rummage through clinking glassware, and Ariya could see the man's face now appeared more placid and tranquil, with the exception of a small blood trail dripping from one of the nostrils. The spider-like hands returned with a filthy rag and wiped the wound. "On to the next one," they whispered, and turned toward the bedroom's exit. Ariya reeled away and threw herself into the library directly across. Her back pressed firmly against the wall with bated breath, despite her chest thundering to the point she feared its beating would disclose her vicinity. The bedroom door swung open with a protracted squeal, and she could hear slow and heavy shuffling footsteps move into the corridor. They came closer and closer, and unexpectedly stopped in front of the library. Ariya's blood chilled to ice, as she could feel ancient malice gazing into where she slipped away. She waited in agonizing, long silence while her heartbeat roared in her ears. The quiet was then broken by the soft rustling of dry fabric emanating from beyond the threshold. Ariya's muscles, locked rigid with terror, began to move with desperate slowness. Daring not to look away, her stiffened hand found the small pouch on her belt and unwrapped the cord from its toggle. A sharp snap of the fingers suddenly echoed from the hallway, and soft candlelight flickered off the edges of the archway. Darkness soon returned, upon the flame being snuffed and joined by puffs of smoke billowing into the room. The heavy footsteps walked away and continued down the hall toward the next victim. As the other door opened and closed, Ariya drew in quick and quiet breaths of air, as if she had been underwater for too long. She remained motionless in the oppressive dark of the library, but could feel the paralyzing dread recede as more focused thoughts returned. Her objective was complete, and the sight of the dream hag was confirmed. All she had to do was to retreat downstairs, exit the church, and fire off the flare. It was a simple plan, although now complicated by the explosive complication of the hag actively preying on its next victim. Ariya clenched her fist over the uncertainty over what she should do. If she fled, the Night Mother would claim the next victim, which was anathema to the Sentinel code of aiding the helpless. Her mind became an entangled web of calculations as she explored whether or not it was possible to save the other resident as well as survive herself. She considered firing the flare from a window, but rejected the thought of being discovered by the noise it would create. The fact the entirety of the church was solid stone and lacked any immediate windows also raised a significant dilemma. Suddenly, she remembered something under the desk that could be the solution to her problem: the arcane mailbox. Ariya rushed forward and was thankful to find pens and stationery on the tabletop. Her hand trembled as she wrote multiple copies of the same short message, detailing who she was, where she was, and that the Night Mother was currently present. She frantically stuffed them into 3 separate envelopes and labelled the sending addresses to the Watchhouse, Sentinel Valeria's desk at the Academy, and to the emergency inbox of the Cadian Temple of Mending. The envelopes slotted into the mailbox, and Ariya nodded at her own desperate ingenuity. Now came the more difficult task of figuring out how to hinder the hag. The sheathed sword at her side was an obvious option, but not a viable one. As beings known for their immense talent of manipulating arc, hags possessed plenty of Aegis to deflect harm, even if Ariya somehow managed to sneak up and deliver an assassin's strike. She wiped away the gruesome visualization of how poorly that would end, and considered alternative solutions to the problem. What Ariya ultimately concluded was that she needed to buy time. The elf peeked down the hallway to confirm the Night Mother was not there and stepped out. Returning to the corner connecting to the spiral stairwell, she pulled out one of Chin's smoke bombs, twisted its 2 halves until it clicked, and then rolled it down the corridor toward the second cleric's apartment. With a sustaining hiss, the object shrouded the hallway with thick smoke, and Ariya could hear a cry of shock and confusion, followed by the sound of the door hastily opening. She sprinted down the stairs, expecting the smoke ball would vex the dream hag enough for her to want to thoroughly investigate the upper floor. As the elf hastily descended, she drew another one of Chin's products, the vial of oil. She spread the contents across the width of the steps behind her, and seconds after, the fibres expanded and grew into a thick tangle of thorns and vines that would hinder anyone daring to cross. With how tight the spiral stairwell was designed, Ariya hoped the momentous speed in which the dream hag gave chase would cause them to be ensnared upon the blind spot of the turn. When the candidate reached the ground floor, her eyes locked forward at the front entrance that seemed to beckon her to escape. She yearned to put as much distance between her and the Night Mother, hop on the sky tram, and return to the safety of the Academy, where she could dress more comfortably and sit somewhere to get lost in her books. Lamentably, Ariya was the sole individual able to keep the hag contained within the confines of the church walls. The elf gritted her teeth and dashed left toward the side of the nave not previously inspected. She threw open the first of 3 unknown doors and found a small chamber lined with tall cherry wood wardrobes and cabinets, as well as an altar at the opposite wall. A massive tome with iron bosses laid closed on the pedestal next to a handful of clay vessels used during service. The storage furniture was a noteworthy option to hide within, although Ariya had a different scheme. She purposely left the entrance to the sacristy ajar with the intention of misdirecting the hag, and subsequently ran the opposite direction to the quartermaster's waiting room. Ariya quietly closed the door and latched the bolt behind her, before stopping before the iron gate impeding her from crossing into the armory and smithy. She tried the handle and was not surprised to find it locked. Crouching down and looking through the keyhole, Ariya was able to discern from its slitherine shape, steel material, and the company logo wrapped around the circumference that it would be more complicated to bypass than the previous ones. The Urema brand was notoriously popular for areas of tighter-than-average security, and it was designed in a way to frustrate and stall amateurs. Thankfully, Ariya had practiced on this company's version in her courses, and was familiar with some of the nuances involved with cracking it open. The slimmest of her hook picks would be the most appropriate tool for the job, and she slotted the tension wrench at the bottom to begin the process. She probed her way through each of the pins as quickly as she could, lifting them high enough to clear the shear line, while shifting the cylinder to rotate with each partial success. Under normal circumstances, she could clear a Urema lock in 10 seconds or less. Tonight, however, her hands shook from adrenaline, and the lack of fine motor skills resulted in prolonged attempts and frustrating resets. Then came an animalistic shriek of rage that echoed from the nave, making the hairs on the back of Ariya's neck stand up. It was difficult to tell if it originated from the stairwell at the trigger of her trap, or from the main chamber itself. Regardless, she had no choice but to hurry. "Please, come on, please, please," Ariya whispered in distress as she prodded the lock. "I am a warden of the city." The dream hag's tone changed from a guttural rasp to the familiar authoritative voice of JC's. "Whoever is here, you are trespassing on restricted property. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." Ariya ignored the honeyed poison in her words and continued to work on the final pin. "Under Turan's eyes within their house, I swear to them that any punishment served would be lenient," JC continued, somewhat more faint and distant. The tumbler finally aligned, and Ariya was through. She saw plenty of equipment, shelving, crates and machines laid about, creating ample spots to hide and move between if she needed to shift or make a getaway. Knowing the entrance into the smithy was made of iron also gave her some assurance, based on Hag's aversion to the material. As she passed by an anvil, her eyes spotted an item that could prove to be useful, and grabbed it with the promise to return it if she was to survive the night. Ariya then found a spot to perch and waited for as long as necessary. Nerve-wracking moments ticked by, with each one measured in the shaky, silent breaths the elf forced into her burning lungs. She tried to steady herself, even though every gasp for air felt like a betrayal that could give her away. Without warning, the quiet was abruptly shattered by a thunderous slam, echoing from the nave as the sacristy door was thrown open with violent, deliberate force. It was followed by a drawn-out pause, then another brutal crash that rhythmically punctuated the darkness. Ariya instinctively recognized that JC wasn't just clearing rooms. She was projecting the strength of many as a terrifying psychological assault. "The sooner you come out, the less likely I'll add charges for resisting arrest." The vocal offerings of both mercy and retribution further solidified her theory. Ariya remained in place and used the noise to approximate the hag's position. Even though the warden was still on the opposite side of the church, it was only a matter of time until JC would make her way to where she was hidden. Despite understanding the warden's tactics, they were admittedly wearing down Ariya's composure. The slamming and shouting crescendoed in volume as JC gradually came closer and closer. The elf bit her lip, as if each sound was a gut-wrenching countdown to the inevitable. Eventually, the handle to the waiting room rattled, and Ariya felt sickened to the verge of tears. Despite the lock, it did little to hinder the dream hag as a cacophonous explosion reverberated from the entrance, smashed into the wall. Heavy booted footsteps, different from the shuffling heard upstairs, entered into the chamber, signalling JC's coming. "You're in here, aren't you, little rat?" she snarled. "You had your chance to come out sooner, and now I've really run out of patience. I will ensure that you waste and rot away for the rest of your life. Your family and friends will not know what becomes of you, and they'll wither away not knowing your fate. Then it'll be your turn to face oblivion, and I pray the hellfires of Tartarus take your spirit and tear into it until there is nothing left to be remade." Ariya could not see JC, yet felt her eyes peering from the service window. She shut her eyes tightly in an attempt to mentally flee from the situation, but could not help but imagine being put away in a dark box for eternity. There was some solace of reassurance her parents would leave no stone unturned in their search if something were to happen. At the very least, the iron separating her and the Night Mother seemed to have stalled her from entering the smithy. The longer they could hold her at bay, the sooner help would arrive to relieve the candidate from this night of torment. The jingling of keys, unfortunately, dashed away all hopes of protection.